The wind, a mournful cantor, swept across the parched plains, carrying dust devils that danced like tormented spirits before collapsing into the brittle grass. Elara clutched the thin shawl tighter around her shoulders, its fabric offering scant comfort against the chill that bit deeper than the evening air. Before her, the collection of rough-hewn shacks and patched canvas tents that called itself Callahan's claim huddled under a sky bruised purple and orange by the setting sun. Each gust seemed to whisper of endings, of hopes eroded like sandstone by relentless time. She had walked until her feet were raw, until the memory of what she fled was a dull ache rather than a searing flame, and this desolate outpost was the end of that weary road. The scent of wood smoke and frying salt pork, usually a promise of sustenance, felt like a judgment on her emptiness. Men, their faces etched with the harsh poetry of the frontier, eyed her with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion, their gazes lingering like burrs. She sought only a place to disappear, a chance to trade labor for bread, to quiet the relentless gnawing in her belly and the louder clamor in her soul. Her inquiry for work, spoken in a voice hoarse from disuse and dust, was met with a gruff dismissal from a stout woman whose apron seemed to bear the culinary history of a month. No room for idle hands, nor charity cases, the woman had said, her words like stones. But then, a younger man, with eyes that held a surprising kindness, mentioned the cook's impending departure, a woman weary of the grit and the grind. And so, Elara found herself offering her services, her quiet desperation a tangible thing in the small, crowded space of the main shack they used as a mess hall. She spoke of simple stews, of bread that rose true, of making much from little, skills learned in a life that now felt like a dream someone else had lived. From a shadowed corner, a man watched. He was taller than the others, his stillness a contrast to their restless energy. His face, lean and weathered, was unreadable, his eyes the color of a stormy sky, holding a depth of sorrow or perhaps just weariness that resonated with a silent chord within her. He offered no word, no sign, yet his presence was a weight, an unspoken question in the already heavy air. She felt his gaze upon her, not intrusive, but profoundly observant, as if he were cataloguing every fray in her dress, every shadow beneath her eyes, every tremor she fought to conceal. When the decision was grudgingly made, she could try, for a week, her pay a cot and her share of the meager rations. It was his almost imperceptible nod that seemed to seal it, a silent assent from a man who spoke little but was clearly heeded. That night, huddled in a drafty lean-to, Elara listened to the wind's lament and felt the crushing weight of her solitude, unaware that the silent watcher, Silas, had quietly ensured a slightly thicker blanket lay beside her allocated space, a small, unnoticed act in the vast indifference of the land. His own past was a ghost that walked beside him, a constant reminder of failures he could not outrun, and in her quiet endurance, he saw a flicker of a resilience he thought the world had long extinguished. The days that followed settled into a rhythm dictated by the sun and the demands of hungry men. Elara rose before dawn, the chill of the earth seeping through the worn soles of her boots, and coaxed life into the embers of the cook fire. The smoke stung her eyes, a daily baptism into her new existence. Her hands, chapped and sore, kneaded dough, chopped root vegetables, stirred pots that seemed to capture the very essence of hardship, thin gruel, stringy stew, coffee that tasted more of chicory and hope than of actual beans. She spoke little, her words reserved for necessities, her movements economical and precise. The settlers, a motley crew of dreamers and drifters, gold seekers, and those simply seeking escape, remained wary. They ate her food, sometimes with a grunt of approval, more often in a silence that was its own form of judgment. She learned their faces, the map of their disappointments and fleeting joys etched onto their skin. And always, there was Silas. He moved through the camp like a phantom, his tasks carried out with a quiet efficiency that was almost unnerving. He mended harnesses, split wood with powerful, rhythmic swings of his axe, his silence a wall around him. Elara found herself watching him, too. She noted the way he favored his left leg ever so slightly, the callus on his hands that spoke of relentless toil, the way his eyes, when he thought no one was looking, would drift to the distant, brooding mountains as if searching for something lost. Mistrust was a bitter herb in the camp's daily fare. Elara felt it keenly, the sideways glances, the muttered conversations that ceased when she drew near. She was an outsider, her past a closed book, and in a place where survival often depended on knowing who to trust, she was an unknown quantity. She kept to herself, finding a strange solace in the methodical nature of her work. One evening, as a cold rain began to fall, turning the dust to slick mud, she noticed the woodpile for her cookfire was alarmingly low. A knot of anxiety tightened in her chest. Damp wood meant a struggle, perhaps no hot meal for the already disgruntled men. She braced herself to ask, to beg if necessary, when she saw Silas returning from the scrubland beyond the camp, a heavy load of dry, seasoned branches balanced on his shoulder. He deposited them near her fire, the thud of the wood a definitive sound in the growing gloom, and then walked away without a word, without even a glance in her direction. It was a small thing, yet it resonated deeply within her. It was a language she understood, the language of action, of provision without expectation. The next morning, she left an extra spoonful of stew in the bowl she set aside, knowing somehow it was his. He ate it, his expression unchanging, but she thought, perhaps, she saw a flicker of something in those stormy eyes, a momentary easing of the harsh lines around his mouth. These silent exchanges became their ritual, a fragile bridge built across a chasm of unspoken pain and guarded hearts. He would leave a freshly sharpened knife by her cutting board, she would ensure the coffee was a little stronger in his cup. The landscape of their interactions was barren of words, yet rich with the unspoken. The seasons turned with agonizing slowness, the relentless sun of summer giving way to the biting winds of autumn, each day a testament to endurance. Ilara's presence at Callahan's claim had become a fixture, like the weathered prayer flag some hopeful soul had tied to a crooked post. Her cooking, though still simple, bore the mark of care, a subtle alchemy that transformed meager ingredients into something that tasted of comfort, of home, however transient. The settlers, by degrees, had softened towards her, their initial suspicion eroded by the steady provision of warm meals and her unwavering, quiet dignity. But Silas remained an enigma, a man carved from the very rock and shadow of the land. One afternoon, a supply wagon, long overdue, failed to arrive. Murmurs of discontent rippled through the camp, flour was low, salt a precious commodity. Panic, a familiar spectre, began to stalk the edges of their forced camaraderie. While others fretted and cast blame, Silas simply vanished. He was gone for 2 days, the silence he left behind somehow heavier than his usual quiet presence. Ilara found her gaze drifting to the empty space where he usually sat, a peculiar ache in her chest. He returned as silently as he had departed, leading a pack mule laden with sacks of flour, beans, coffee, and even a small crate of dried apples, a forgotten luxury. He offered no explanation, merely unloaded the goods and resumed his work, leaving the camp buzzing with speculation. Where had he gone? How had he procured such bounty when the nearest trading post was days away and notoriously unreliable? Whispers followed him like his shadow, that he had a secret cache, that he knew hidden trails, that he was more than he seemed. Ilara, too, felt the pull of the mystery surrounding him. One evening, while tidying the rough-hewn shelf that served as her pantry, she found a small, intricately carved wooden bird, no bigger than her thumb, tucked beside her jar of herbs. Its lines were smooth, its form delicate yet strong. She knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that it was Silas who had left it. She picked it up, its polished wood warm against her palm, a silent message she couldn't quite decipher but felt profoundly. Later that week, a raw, blustering windstorm tore through the claim, ripping at canvas and threatening to scatter their meager possessions to the four corners of the desolate plains. The flap of Ilara's lean-to-cook shack was torn loose, flapping wildly, threatening to expose her dwindling supplies to the driving rain that followed. As she struggled against the wind, her fingers numb and her strength failing, Silas was suddenly there, his solid presence a bulwark against the storm. Together, without a word exchanged, they wrestled the heavy canvas back into place, his strength augmenting hers, their hands brushing in the frantic effort. When it was secured, he paused, his gaze meeting hers in the dim, flickering light of her lantern. For a moment, the storm outside and the storms within them seemed to recede, and there was only the shared space of that look, a silent acknowledgement of a connection forged in hardship. Then, Jedediah, a burly man with mean eyes and a perpetually discontented sneer, stumbled past, his voice thick with drink and malice. "Look at Sem," he slurred, gesturing vaguely towards Ilara. "Think you're special, do you, girl, with him watching over YA?" Silas turned, his body coiling with a sudden, lethal tension. His voice, when it came, was low, colder than the wind. "Mind your tongue, Jedediah." "And your steps, Jed," for all his bluster, visibly recoiled from the ice in Silas's tone and the unwavering intensity of his gaze, muttering an apology before scurrying away. The unspoken protection was now undeniable, a shield Silas had wordlessly extended, and Elara felt a confusing warmth spread through her, a fragile bloom in the wasteland of her heart. The fragile piece of Callahan's claim, always as precarious as a candle flame in a gale, was shattered not by wind or weather, but by a single, creased piece of paper. It arrived with a lone rider, a government agent whose polished boots and officious air seemed utterly out of place amidst the grit and grime. He asked for the man in charge, and when several settlers gestured vaguely towards the disparate group, his gaze, sharp and assessing, settled upon Silas, who was mending a broken wagon wheel, his movements deliberate and unhurried. The agent dismounted, strode towards him, and presented the letter with a curt, "Silas Blackwood, Esquire." Regarding the Blackwood Creek territory, the name, spoken aloud, hung in the air like the toll of a distant, ominous bell. Blackwood. Territory. Esquire. Words that spoke of ownership, of power, of a world far removed from the daily struggle of this forgotten outpost. A stunned silence fell over the assembled settlers. Jedediah, who had been loitering nearby, his ears always pricked for gossip or trouble, let out a harsh bark of a laugh. "Blackwood," he sneered, his eyes gleaming with malicious triumph. "So, the quiet man ain't so quiet after all. Owns the damn ground we're standing on, does he? Been watching us sweat and starve on his private kingdom." The accusation, raw and venomous, struck Elara with the force of a physical blow. Her gaze flew to Silas, seeking denial, explanation, anything but the stoic resignation she saw settling onto his features. He straightened slowly, the tools falling from his hands with a soft clatter that sounded deafening in the sudden hush. His stormy eyes met hers, and in their depths, she saw not deceit, but a profound weariness, a deep-seated pain that mirrored her own shock. "It's true," Silas said, his voice quiet but carrying clearly in the tense atmosphere. "This land is mine. My father acquired it long ago." The admission rippled through the settlers like a shockwave. Anger, confusion, and a bitter sense of betrayal contorted their faces. They had toiled here, believing it unclaimed, or at least common ground, their sweat and hopes poured into the unforgiving soil. "And you let us stay," one woman cried out, her voice trembling. "Watched us break our backs, thinking we were building something for ourselves, while you held the deed all along." Silas's gaze swept over them, lingering for a moment on Elara, who stood frozen, the carved wooden bird clutched so tightly in her hand that its edges bit into her palm. "It was empty," he said, his words measured, heavy. "And you were struggling. I saw no harm in it." "I never asked for anything," but his explanation, however true, felt like ash in their mouths. The quiet acts of kindness, the shared burdens, they were now cast in a different, harsher light. Was it benevolence, or the detached noblesse oblige of a lord observing his serfs? Elara felt a cold dread seep into her bones, a familiar chill of disillusionment. Had his silent protection been a lie, a carefully constructed facade? The small bridge of trust they had so painstakingly built seemed to crumble into dust. She turned away, unable to meet his eyes any longer, the sense of betrayal a fresh, bleeding wound. He had known her desperation, her flight from a past she couldn't name, and yet he had kept this monumental truth hidden. The silence she had once found comforting in him now felt like a deliberate, suffocating concealment. That night, the cook fire burned low, mirroring the dimming hope in her heart. The food she prepared tasted of her own bitter disappointment. Silas did not come for his portion. The space he usually occupied remained starkly, achingly empty. He was isolated once more, not by his own choice this time, but by the weight of a truth that had shattered the fragile community and, perhaps, the even more fragile connection he had begun to forge with the quiet woman who had brought a spark of warmth to his desolate existence. His redemption, sought in anonymity and quiet deeds, now seemed further away than ever. The revelation of Silas's ownership threw Callahan's claim into disarray. Jedediah, emboldened by the perceived deception, fanned the flames of resentment, his words painting Silas as a calculating tyrant, biding his time to evict them all. Fear, ugly and potent, took root among the settlers. They gathered in anxious clusters, their voices low and mutinous, their eyes, when they turned to Silas, filled with suspicion and hostility. He faced their animosity with his customary stoicism, but Ilara, watching from the periphery of her cook shack, saw the lines of strain deepen around his eyes, the way his shoulders seemed to bowed, not by physical labor, but by a burden far heavier. He made no move to defend himself further, allowing their accusations to wash over him like a bitter tide. He continued his work, solitary now, the invisible wall around him rebuilt, thicker and more impenetrable than before. Ilara, too, retreated into her own silence, her heart a tangled knot of confusion and hurt. His quiet acts of kindness warred with the magnitude of his secret. The carved bird felt like a brand in her pocket, a symbol of a trust she feared was misplaced. Yet, she could not entirely dismiss the memory of his gaze in the storm, the unspoken understanding that had passed between them, the steady, unassuming protection he had offered. Was it all a lie? Or was there a truth more complex, more painful, hidden beneath the surface? The simmering tension finally boiled over on a night when the moon was a sliver of silver in an ink-black sky. Jedediah, fueled by cheap whiskey and his own festering grievances, rallied a handful of the more disgruntled settlers. "He aims to throw us out." Jed slurred, his voice raw with manufactured outrage. "Take back what we've worked for. We gotta show him he can't treat us like dirt on his fancy land." Their shadowy figures moved toward Silas's small, isolated cabin at the edge of the claim, carrying makeshift weapons, axe handles, lengths of rusted chain. A cold dread pierced through Ilara's turmoil. She had known injustice, had felt the sting of false accusation, the terror of being at the mercy of others' malice. Whatever Silas's reasons for his silence, this was wrong. This was the tyranny of the mob. As they neared his cabin, their threats growing louder, more violent, Ilara found her feet moving. She stepped out of the shadows of her cook shack, her heart pounding like a trapped bird against her ribs. "Stop!" Her voice, though not loud, cut through their drunken bravado with surprising clarity. They turned, startled to see her, the quiet cook, standing in their path. Jedediah sneered. "Get out of the way, woman." "This ain't your concern, it is my concern," Ilara said, her voice gaining strength. When men act like cowardly wolves in the night, she took another step forward, her gaze sweeping over them, finally resting on Jedediah's bloated face. "He gave you shelter when you had none. He shared his labor. He brought supplies when we were starving. What have you done, Jedediah, but stir up trouble and drink another man's share?" A flicker of her own painful past surfaced, raw and real. "I know what it is to be judged unfairly, to have your life threatened by lies." Her words, simple and heartfelt, struck a chord with some of the men. They shuffled uncomfortably, their bravado faltering. Just then, the cabin door opened, and Silas stepped out, a rifle held loosely in his hands, his face grim but resolute in the moonlight. He hadn't been caught unawares. His eyes found Ilara's, and in them, she saw not just surprise, but a dawning, profound gratitude that made her breath catch. Her defense of him, her unexpected act of trust, was a balm to his wounded spirit. He looked at the shamefaced men. "I have no intention of evicting anyone who deals honestly and works for their keep," Silas stated, his voice calm but edged with steel. "This land is vast. There is room for those who wish to build, not destroy. For those who wish to stay, we will draw up fair leases. For those who wish to leave, I will ensure you have provisions for your journey." His offer, reasonable and just, deflated Jedediah's mutiny. The group dispersed, grumbling, their anger spent, leaving Jedediah isolated in his own malice. The crisis had passed, not through violence, but through courage and an unexpected alliance. In the quiet aftermath, Silas turned to Ilara. The rifle was lowered. "You didn't have to do that," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Yes," she replied softly, meeting his gaze, the carved bird now a comforting weight in her hand. "I did. The chasm between them, once so wide, now felt bridgeable." The truth of his ownership remained, but her act of faith had laid the first plank. In the days that followed, a fragile calm settled over Callahan's claim, now more aptly known as Blackwood Creek. Some settlers, unable to reconcile their pride or their distrust, took Silas's offer of provisions and departed, their dust trails fading into the horizon. Jedediah was among the first to leave, his bluster gone, replaced by a sullen resentment. Those who remained, a smaller, more sober group, began the work of formalizing their presence, discussing terms for leases with Silas, a new respect dawning in their eyes for the quiet man who owned the land yet sought no dominion over their souls. Elara found her own rhythm changing. The cook shack, once a place of solitary labor, now sometimes saw Silas lingering, sharing a cup of coffee, the silence between them no longer strained but filled with a comfortable understanding. He spoke, haltingly at first, of his father, a man driven by ambition who had acquired vast tracts of land but had never found peace upon them, leaving Silas with a legacy that felt more like a burden than a blessing. He confessed his shame at his initial inaction, his fear of disrupting the fragile ecosystem of the claim by revealing his identity, his quiet hope that by simply living and working among them, he could somehow atone for an inherited guilt he didn't quite understand but felt deeply. Elara listened, her quiet presence an invitation for him to unburden his heart. She, in turn, shared fragments of her own story, the loss that had set her adrift, the whispers and false judgments that had driven her to seek anonymity in the harsh indifference of the frontier. Their shared vulnerabilities became the mortar that bound them, stone by painful stone, building something new and strong from the ruins of their pasts. The vast, rugged landscape, once a symbol of isolation, began to feel like a shared canvas. They walked together sometimes, as the sun dipped below the crimson hills, Silas pointing out hidden springs, Elara noticing the resilient wildflowers pushing through stony ground, a testament to life's tenacity. He rebuilt her lean-to into a sturdier cabin, its timbers solid, its hearth warm, a silent promise of permanence. She planted a small herb garden beside it, its tender green shoots a splash of vibrant hope against the dun earth. The empty rope that had once swung as a symbol of despair in her mind's eye was replaced by the image of hands, his and hers, working together, building, tending, creating. The faded photograph he had once hidden was now sometimes left on the rough-hewn table, a portrait of a stern-faced couple, his parents, their solemn gazes a reminder of the past, but no longer a barrier to the future. One evening, as firelight danced on the walls of her small cabin, Silas took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against hers. Words were still not his strength, but his eyes, the color of a clearing sky after a storm, spoke volumes. They spoke of respect, of a deepening affection, of a future he dared to hope they could build together, not on the shifting sands of secrets, but on the bedrock of hard-won trust. Elara's fingers curled around his, a silent assent, a promise returned. The long shadows of their pasts began to recede, replaced by the soft glow of a shared dawn. The wild, unforgiving land that had witnessed their individual struggles now held the quiet promise of their shared peace, a sanctuary built not of wood and stone alone, but of courage, forgiveness, and a love as resilient and enduring as the ancient mountains that watched over them. Their story, etched in the dust and dreams of a harsh frontier, reminds us that even in the deepest desolation, courage can bloom, and trust, though fragile, can be rebuilt with quiet acts of kindness and unwavering faith. Elara and Silas, two souls adrift in a sea of hardship, found in each other an anchor, a quiet harbor against the storms of life. They teach us that true strength is not the absence of wounds, but the resilience to heal, to reach out, and to build anew from the ashes of the past. Their journey from isolation to connection, from silent suffering to a shared, peaceful existence, is a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit to find solace and strength in another, transforming a barren landscape into a place of belonging. If their slow-burn romance, built on the foundations of mutual respect and quiet understanding, has touched your heart and inspired you to believe in the power of redemption and the quiet strength of love against all odds, then we invite you to become part of our community. Subscribe to our channel for more tales that explore the depths of human emotion, the courage found in adversity, and the enduring connections that illuminate even the darkest paths. Let their story be a reminder that sometimes, the most profound bonds are forged not in grand declarations, but in the silent language of the heart, in shared struggles, and in the steadfast choice to protect and cherish one another.